Welcome, everyone. This is session IC55, Lessons Learned from the Development of the International Society of Wheelchair Professionals. I'm Nancy Augustine. I'm a member of the ISWP team. I will be moderating today's session and will provide the CEU code at the end. Before we get started, please remember to mute yourself. You can use the chat feature to ask your questions, and we'll be monitoring the chat feature throughout today's session and addressing those questions as we can. I'm very pleased to turn it over to John Pearlman and Mary Goldberg, your presenters for this session.
Thanks, Nancy. Welcome, everyone. Great to see a lot of friendly faces, and we're very excited after many years running this program to give an overview of it and talk about some of the lessons learned. So we'll jump right in. And again, you'll see in the chat, Mary wanted everyone to share where you're from. So please go ahead and do that. And also, as Nancy mentioned, please just post any questions in the chat and we will we'll be able to answer them, some on the fly, and then we'll definitely have time afterwards. So I'll get started. My name is John Pearlman. I am a faculty here at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm an associate professor and the chair of the department, and have been in the role as the founding director and for many years the co-director with Mary of the International Society of Wheelchair Professionals. And so we've been very honored to have funding primarily from USAID to run this project, and actually launched this in 2015 at ISS, the last year that it was down in Nashville. So this is a little bit of an annual event for us to talk about ISWP. So the learning objectives are to describe 3 tools available that we have, and many of those are, all of those are available through our website. So that's the first hint of where to find those. To identify at least one opportunity for engaging with ISWP, and then to contrast ISWP's tools and value propositions with the associations that you might, professional societies and associations that you might be a member of. So why did we launch this? Why are we here? And why have we received the support is to try to provide sorry, I see the red lines on the screen. To try to meet this unmet need of appropriate wheelchairs. So this number, based on a population estimate, there's about 75 million people in need of a chair. Very few people have access to one, and this primarily in less resource settings. So as we know, and many of the presentations here at ISS have been focused on improving service delivery of wheelchairs and the quality of that service provision and models of services. In many countries around the world, there just are no services available. And so that's a big driver for ISWP, is to try to coordinate activities and drive that. There's not, I think we all are at this conference and really understand the benefits of wheelchairs and seating. There is also sort of higher level motivation, which is through the United Nations, that states that access to wheelchairs and training and available products is a human right, and it's an enabler to other human rights. And so there are some really strong global documents demonstrating the need. And so this in many ways is sort of preaching to the choir for the reason that we're all in this, but it's also very valuable in terms of promoting and advocating countries to take this seriously. And so this is another driver of why USAID would fund this type of activity. We also know, and again, I think we're all aware of this, that not receiving an appropriate wheelchair, which is quite common, leads to several complications, pressure injuries, postural deformities. We also find that the chairs break down very quickly. And so you might assume that you have wheeled mobility, but it tends to be very temporary if the chair is not appropriate for the environment. And breakdowns are strongly associated with injuries. And so there's a strong need to move in the direction of providing appropriate wheelchairs. Our mission, ISWP's mission and role, was initially developed at a conference in 2012. And many of you know about the GATE initiative, which the Global Cooperation on Assistive Technology, which is run through the World Health Organization. Back in 2012, they assembled a group of leaders in the wheelchair sector and developed a strategy to coordinate the wheelchair sector in a more efficient, effective way and try to share and develop standards across products and services. And so what was considered then as a priority to develop a wheelchair secretariat became what ISWP is today. And it was focused on increasing collaboration and coordination, developing and promoting evidence-based standards, and build product and service capacity globally. And that's, in a nutshell, really what we've been focused on. We do this under a couple of different frameworks or lists of priorities. So the first one is GATE's own 5P framework on provision, products, personnel, and policy that's all focused on supporting the people who need these devices. And then the other kind of guiding document that we use was something that our team helped develop through a stakeholder meeting that was held in 2018 in Bangalore. And we developed these priorities of different areas that needed to be strengthened in the wheelchair sector. And so we support all of these, and we're going to talk about a few of them as part of this meeting and talk about the lessons learned in the years that we've been running it. The starting point for ISWP, of course, like I told you, was this 2012 meeting related to GATE needing to have a separate organization helping to coordinate the sector. And we also had a starting point of wheelchair guidelines that were published in 2008, and then a series of training packages that were published afterwards. And those are all training packages related to actually providing wheelchairs or managing wheelchair activities. So from like a operational side of how do you run a wheelchair service. And then there was another level in 2017 that we helped with of training of trainers. So how do you train the trainers to go teach the basic, intermediate, stakeholders, and managers training? And so that was published in 2017. So this is really the core content we had to start with. And this was, the first lesson learned that I want to share, which is these are very long, this is a long road. The guidelines published in 2008, that process, which I started, I was part of, it started in 2006. And when I was a student, and so years and years later, we see progress. It's very slow, but it's a real message that I had to, I think, really learn as my part, ebbed and flowed in the wheelchair sector, the international sector over my career, but also something that was important for me to share with my students who, are a lot of the energy of the work that we do in an academic environment. And they're very passionate about, trying to change the world. And in the country, many of the countries that they came from, they would see firsthand the poor quality of wheelchairs and just the lack of supply of wheelchairs. And so that's a lesson that's hard to teach. It's just something you got to live, which is when you're trying to move the needle on this type of global activity, you have to start, and maybe a decade later, you've seen things move in the right direction, but you've also seen many steps backwards in different locations. So that was one of the lessons that that I thought was important to share in this meeting. So since 2015, when we launched at ISS in Nashville, we have a very clear mission, which is to serve as this global resource for wheelchair service standards and provision through several different parallel activities. We have a vision related to everybody who needs wheeled mobility has access to it. We've received a little over $6 million, primarily from USAID, but we've also received, hundreds of thousands of dollars through other grant mechanisms and through donations to support the activity. And we have several active, right now, 5 active working groups and different subcommittees. And over the years of the organization, hundreds of different volunteers who have participated and continue to participate. So it's been a major undertaking and has drawn a lot of support from partners all around the world. And what we've seen through this collaboration and building of these networks are a large network of wheelchair service providers. So Mary will talk about WIN, which is the Wheelchair International Network, which is our platform and community of practice, has nearly 6,000 users from 111 countries. We've trained people all over the world, now at 1,000, and we continue to have parallel training efforts going on around the world. And those trainings are primarily focused on wheelchair service providers and training them how to provide appropriate provide wheelchairs appropriately. Basic test takers, nearly 6,000. And so the list goes on of just how we've accumulated this impact and this reach over the many years that we've contributed to it. And then we have volunteer and partners from organizations all around the world, government organizations, non-for-profits, that really are in many different continents. Several universities have participated. And this was the second lesson I wanted to talk about, which is, we live in a world in the academic environment. We have a certain lens of the process you go through to develop standards, for instance, and implement them. We have a clinic that we help coordinate through and run through our medical center. So we have a lens on this. And what you find is that everybody's headed in the same direction, right? Everybody sees eye to eye that we want to develop and we want to produce and we want to deliver the best appropriate wheelchair technology. And so everybody is headed in the right direction, but everybody's along a different pathway. So that has to do with the organizational structure. It has to do with the funding mechanisms. It has to do with the way that people have learned how they can make an impact, whether that's on the ground or through their training. And so it has been, I would say, one of the most important lessons to learn, which is you have to take extra steps to listen and to understand what motivates different organizations and what is really core to their mission. And I'll give you one example because I just showed images of it. The wheelchair guidelines and the training packages are an interesting case study of these different lenses that we have on it. In an academic environment, in our network of folks from academia that we work with on this project, they see those as outdated and needing to be updated and informed by the most updated literature. And so there's a sense that those documents are actually out of date and they're not very useful. But then, 80% of our partners see them as the key to opening doors around the world because they have the WHO brand on the cover. And they become this these critical documents. And so coming to recognizing we're all in this for the same reason and that we're all headed in the right direction, in the same direction, is one of the things that we've learned as something that you have to spend a lot of time doing and building trust across the partners to accomplish this kind of task. So our activities in a nutshell are, and what we focus on in this presentation are product standards and service standards. And I'm going to start with product standards. It's my area of expertise and where I focus most of my time on in this project. And then lead off a little bit with the service standards and hand it off to Mary to complete the presentation. Related to product standards, the work, again, since 2015, we established a standards working group, identified key gaps in the sector related to product standards, and we developed several test methods. So the one on the top left, you can see the video running, is a caster tester. That is a system that was high priority. Casters are I would say the weakest link on wheelchairs. They fail quite commonly. When they do fail, people are often injured, and there's really no test, and has not been a test to evaluate whether the casters are durable and reliable. And so that was top priority for ISWP. We've developed a test method. We've actually promoted it through ISO, and it is now an international standard. And so we have now companies that are wanting to test to it. We have several case examples of where we've tested casters, and it's led to design improvements and revisions. And so we think that we've moved the needle related to caster and wheelchair breakdowns associated with that. We also, the bottom left, the rolling resistance system, that is another test method that was developed as part of this project, really trying to focus in on how do wheels and casters perform over different surfaces. And so that test method, we developed it in collaboration with several groups. Laterno, you can see on the top right, being an example of the first prototype of that system. And then we built one here at Pitt, which is on the bottom left, that we continue to test and develop performance measures for casters and tires under lots of different conditions. So one of the interesting findings there is that we know that if a rear wheel is not perfectly aligned, if the rear wheels are not aligned parallel, it can introduce a lot of rolling resistance and increase it. And so we're starting in the process to develop a standard associated with that to make sure that wheels are well aligned. And we've done community measurements and know that about a third of the wheels out there in the community are misaligned to the degree that they can really introduce a lot of drag on the wheelchair, which increases the load on the wheelchair users' shoulders and slows them down and causes long-term injury. And so that's some of the other work related to rolling resistance. The bottom center is a treadmill test that was developed in partnership with Free Wheelchair Mission. So that test is running in California, and Free Wheelchair Mission offers testing for products through that system. On the bottom right, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is a wiki that we've developed, and that's to share information, best practices about how to do tests, the design drawings for test methods. So it's really meant to be support for test labs around the world to strengthen, build their capacity, grow their capacity. We've developed best practice guidelines. So this design considerations was developed and published in 2017, and it's was developed with some of the most well-known wheelchair designers from around the world participated in this to give pointers essentially on how to develop and select the different components of a wheelchair so they can be reliable and they can be adjustable and provide the postural support that's necessary. So it's one of the outcomes of the project. I mentioned the wiki, which again is a community resource. It's freely available. It has videos and text descriptions of how to perform wheelchair tests. And it also has design drawings for the tests themselves. So it's all available and people can contribute to it. And we have quarterly meetings with a network of test labs around the world to help support and build their capacity. And this is the list. We have 15 test centers that are participating in these quarterly meetings where we have one test lab sort of demonstrate a couple of tests, we talk about it, and it's really sort of a casual environment for us to share best practices. And the wiki serves as the platform where those information can be shared and accessed by individual partners. The last slide that I'll talk about is related to standards for wheelchair service provision. And so this is where I'll hand it off to Mary, but I want to bring up a really this important project. And this is led by the World Health Organization. So this is going to be a formal standard published by WHO, and both ISWP and ISPO are the technical partners that are helping to support the development of this. We have co-authors that are deeply knowledgeable in the wheelchair sector. Rachel Cowan, who you might recognize her name, she is a Pitt alum and faculty at UAB and also a wheelchair user. We have working groups set up, and this is a standard process by the World Health Organization, where you have a development group, a review group, a steering committee, and the coordination group, which I'm on. And this was launched in September of 2020 and supposed to be completed by this coming September. So a pretty long process to get these developed. Two systematic reviews are currently in process right now. And so those will be published and available through academic literature and typical index literature that will help, I think, in for all of us who do look for the most recent research to drive our activities. And going back to what I told you earlier was one of the starting points for ISWP, the document that's being developed is really an update of the document that was published in 2008. So it will be both an update, it'll be very grounded in literature, and will help hopefully governments take the next step to adopting appropriate service provision. And then I will pass this off to Mary, who's going to talk a little bit more about the activities related to service standards and qualifying wheelchair service providers.
Thank you, John. I also am at the University of Pittsburgh. So by way of introductions, I am an associate professor there. And as John mentioned, I've been leading the training activities for ISWP and kind of serving in a co-director type role since the beginning. I've included some of the links that I'll be talking about. Nancy, thank you for grabbing those other ones from the product section. If there are some that I missed, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So we developed WIN, this kind of connection platform, the Wheelchair International Network, which now really is our whole site for the society, but as a way to coordinate all of the types of training activities that were occurring around the world. So it's our home for training resources, but also a social connection type of platform where we can engage other providers in discussion forums. All of our training modules and tests can be accessed from this site, as well as an interactive map. So any certified provider is able to be searched on there, but are also able just to get a sense of the overall adoption of the products and where people are residing. You could go to the next one, please, John. Thank you. And that's playing. Yep. So this is an interactive graphic of the global use of our basic test. So over time, through the gracious help of a lot of volunteers, we've been able to translate the basic test now into 15 languages, which has certainly helped in the adoption of the basic test. So this ultimately will increase to over 5,000 test takers from 106 different countries. We hope to follow this model to try to increase the adoption of our training materials, which I believe we get to on the next slide. Thank you, John. So we've developed these online courses, and as John mentioned, the packages from the World Health Organization have been really fundamental in kind of scoping what's out there related to best practices in wheelchair service provision, but they're all static PDFs that reside on the WHO website and kind of a snapshot in time. So going back to 2008 of what the evidence was at that time. we've been able to incorporate additional resources into our training packages, as well as embed interactive activities to try to increase and scale how we can train people worldwide. We've tested the effectiveness of our different training methods and have been able to identify that trainees who have been trained in a hybrid format where they receive both online training and in-person training fare no worse on our basic tests, for example, than those who have been trained in traditionally in-person formats. We have translated these in up to 4 languages. So the basic course is now available in English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish, and the other training courses are all available in English and Spanish. And we certainly have not been able to do this alone. We've had a lot of volunteers also that have worked with us on this process and have received additional funding in addition to our core USAID support from Latter-day Saints charities and the American Wheelchair Mission. And Nancy has included the link in the chat for where to join WIN, and it is free for everyone, and also kind of just brings you into the membership network where you can receive our newsletter and things like that. Thank you, Nancy. So we took our core resources, both the basic test and the basic training course, and developed the wheelchair service provider certification at the basic level. So this recognizes those that have gone through this certification process for 2 years on our website, that you've received not only the appropriate training, but you've also been able to pass the basic test, justifying, your basic knowledge level. It also demonstrates that you're committed to the ethical standards of practice. So there's a short little quiz also that tests you on those ethical standards. And the certification is available in English, Spanish, and French. There is a fee for the certification, but it is pretty modest in comparison to other certifications that are out there in the assistive technology space, and is also a tiered fee structure. So we have a cost for low income, middle income, and then high income countries. And there's also a student rate that is pretty significantly reduced. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We also have organically grown, similar to the testing sites that John mentioned, a group of academic training partners. So it was at the beginning just a few institutions that has grown now, I believe, to 29 different members from 29 different countries, which is really exciting. And we come together some frequency between bi-monthly and quarterly per year, where we hear from one training program about the barriers that they have faced related to integrating more wheelchair service training content into their rehabilitation training programs. A recent example was they just found us online and through our network, and a training institution in Russia presented this past year, again, without any kind of targeted outreach from us. So we've been really excited to see the enthusiasm around how academic training partners can support each other. Now, next slide, please, Nancy. From there, we actually had an activity that preceded the Wheelchair Educators Package called SMART, so the Seating and Mobility Academic Resource Toolkit, where we simply pooled resources from our academic training partners and then had some filtering mechanisms on the website where any instructor from any different discipline from any country around the world would be able to research or identify materials for their training programs based on professional discipline, based on language, based on a lab activity or a test. But we realized that we needed something beyond just those resources. So we evolved to develop this Wheelchair Educators Package that has been led by our colleague Paula Rushton at the University of Montreal, a true global effort. So 29 volunteers from many, many different countries and 7 working groups. So this is really supposed to be the how-to. So SMART has the resources, but how do you really do this? How can you advocate to get more wheelchair training into your program? So both the content and the website are still in development. We're really pleased to complete an internal review this past summer. And in the fall, we completed our external review and are now engaging in pilot sites. So this will be a package that iteratively evolves and will be very dynamic on our website so that it can be updated over time. Go ahead, Nance. Thank you. This is a new service. I'm saying Nancy and this is John. Can you click through there just a couple bullets here? This is a new service that we're offering to recognize courses. So you may be familiar with a program accreditation process where an external body comes in and says, yes, you're teaching what you should be teaching. You have the resources that you need to teach that content. We are starting at a very fundamental level where we're just looking at an individual course. We know that this is accreditation can be a very complex process. So we're simply assessing the course or conference content. We have this service available in both English and Spanish against the WHO basic level package. And then we provide a recognition, so a little seal that says that ISWP has reviewed your course content and that it's in line with best practice. And then there's the link there, which we included in the chat, if you're interested in completing the process. That at present is a free service that we're offering, and we've acknowledged courses so far in Ireland, Saudi Arabia, Canada, Argentina, and Colombia. Next slide, please. So these are kind of my lessons learned. Excuse the cultural reference. That was just way too fun to not include. So my lessons 3 through 5. The first one, lesson 3, being that it's kind of difficult to be the new kid on the block and to build consensus. It takes a really long time. So in our first year that we were awarded the grant from USAID, we attended a lot of different meetings at the World Health Organization, conferences around the world, consensus building meetings with other NGOs that have been working in this space for a long time. And I'll never forget a colleague who had ended up being a really close contributor and someone that we still work with a lot today, said, you know, you are the new kid on the block, and it's not easy to be the new kid on the block, and we're all trying to figure out how you fit into the picture. So it took a long time to, I think, generate that trust also with the partners that have been doing this for a long time, as well as to build consensus. So we set out with a certain set of objectives when we applied for the funding from USAID, that this was what we were going to accomplish, and didn't factor in that trying to achieve consensus on the process that we were going to use and what was going to go into those materials was just going to take a really long time. So I think we've had a more realistic sense over the last 5 years, and certainly the last couple of years, to build in that time. It just takes a lot of time. Next slide, or next point, please. Our fourth lesson was striking the balance of sort of this bottom up and top down adoption and mandates. And if you could go to that sub bullet there, with the goal of leading to standards and even national mandates and global adoption. That we've run these grassroots campaigns. So the certification is a good example of trying to appeal, sort of just do the right thing to all the providers, right? We know that this is an elective certification, but here's a process, here's a standard related to wheelchair service provision that you can apply for to provide evidence that you know what you're doing, you know that you're adhering to best practices, but it's slow to be able to do that. So we've tried instead to also work top down, where we've tried to appeal to organizations. So saying to the organizational leadership, we think that you trying to promote certification within your company or within your organization is the right thing to do. Trying to softly mandate, perhaps, right, that this certification is something that they should implement. And we know that the carrot approach is way more attractive than the stick approach, and certainly think that this would apply to the national level as well, that, you know, we have to continue to try to generate enthusiasm at the grassroots level to the individuals that can help to promote that organizational or national level adoption. The last lesson learned, thank you, is funding and sustainability. It's just very hard. We all know this. We're working within kind of a niche area. Funding is difficult to come by. Sustainability is difficult. So even once the enthusiasm is there and has grown, so certification, trainings, and so on, we receive a lot of requests for this, which is great, but they often come with the caveat of, but we don't have funding, or help us fundraise. So a lot of requests for subsidies for both trainings and certifications, but we know that there is no free lunch. And so this is certainly something that we're trying to figure out, because the materials that we've developed, the trainings that we run, the certification program all require maintenance, and that those resources have to come from somewhere. So moving along to policy, the next slide, please. Fairly early on, we developed a policy advocacy toolkit. And this was alongside also a global awareness campaign, just to raise the awareness of wheelchair service provision and the lack of wheelchairs and lack of training around the world, to assist national stakeholders concerned with access to appropriate wheelchairs to understand the current wheelchair sector situation. So we developed a handful of case studies. This is an open access resource. There is an opportunity also for any visitor to upload information, upload case studies, so that we can ideally learn from each other's contexts and not start from the beginning. Next slide. Thank you. And so more recently, our impact in Colombia, and if you attended Sarah's session yesterday, or we referenced it also in this morning's session on the Dominican Republic, we've been part of meetings with the Colombian Ministry of Health to provide feedback and support on the development of a legislation for wheelchair service. So this would be where each company that manufactures or imports wheelchairs would need to have certified personnel within their company. And the government is also creating different roles in service provision to include the skills that they need, and will ultimately require ISWP certifications as a part of the process. So ISWP and its certification process has been included by name in these policy documents, which is huge for us. I'll talk a little bit about some early success we've had elsewhere, but this is really the first time that we're seeing our actual organization name and its products being written into legislation. So it's a huge win and a total testament to Sarah and her team, a real stalwart effort to get this into practice, as well as the support of Perry Lowe, who many of you know. So we're really excited to be involved and just really humbled by this activity and effort. So next slide. So lessons 6 through 8, if you could please click there. So the first one is just that we know that grassroots coalitions can work. So Sarah has her own organization called WE, which is an acronym, but she does amazing things related to policy and advocacy and training. And these are all super interconnected, which we'll link to my last lesson learned. But we've had some early success in the Philippines with a lot of leadership from Latter-day Saints, who evolved their charity wheelchair donation model to include, promote, advocate, and ultimately get into the legislation that individuals who are providing intermediate level wheelchairs, especially to children, need to have a certain level of certification or recognition to be able to be reimbursed for their service. Similarly, in Indonesia, a coalition-based approach was used in a province to get written into legislation that wheelchair products should be covered by the government. John was critical in that activity. And then we just covered Colombia and the awesome work that's happening there. So we know that small steps can result in really big change, which is super exciting. And we've been able to see so much of that occur in just this 5-year period. You could click again. Thank you. This morning, we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that we faced in the Dominican Republic, but transfer of governmental power and administrations can really halt progress. Obviously, transfer just in and out of a certain organization, but most fundamentally at the national level, especially where in some cases you only have a 2-year period to push legislation through. We have seen massive efforts with really grand plans and even funding and resources get halted because a point person is no longer part of the effort. So that has been a real challenge. And then the last lesson here is just an emphasis, and we need to all have this, on all the P's, not just products. So if you could click maybe one more time, John. There's that WHO graphic that was presented earlier. So often we're approached by an organization or government saying we need help, we need some guidance related to what kind of wheelchairs the product, right? The specific product we should be providing, and maybe we get to influence the product standards and based on the work that is happening within ISWP that John described. But so often the provision piece and the personnel piece. So who actually is going to do this? What's the service process going to be once the products are there and available? And do the personnel actually have the training and skills that they need to be able to do it? Is not there. So this happened even recently. We have a professional standards board that governs our certification process. And one of our members of the professional standards board said, you know, in the recent UNICEF tender, and not to call anybody out, but in that recent UNICEF tender, specific guidance related to products. But wouldn't it be great if the providers and those who have been trained have some kind of certification and you know, have to perform at a particular standard to be able to access that product. So we certainly continue advocacy efforts to emphasize that this is a systems-based approach and we can't just focus on the products. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is certainly not meant to be boastful about ISWP's impact, rather to show that, you know, as materials are created and as volunteers come together, as these committees get initiated, we just start to see more and more organic growth. So an all hands-on approach has been really impactful, where we've been able to have a really warm welcome from wheelchair service providers. So this is building off of that impact pyramid slide that John showed before with all the different numbers, but this is more just kind of anecdotally what we've seen. That ISWP is also a wheelchair users hub for resources and announcements. So having a single place where people can come to literally and figuratively to share information has been really useful over time. And now when we share information that we receive from you with our greater community, it's going out to thousands of people. Manufacturers and suppliers are keen to test their products. And again, all the fabulous work that's gone into the product standards work with now test sites coming together. So the more awareness we build around that, the more test sites there are available. Ideally, the more products that are compliant and the better products that wheelchair users receive. And then the partners' enthusiasm. Again, this is just, you know, this is not us at Pitt or in Pittsburgh, but this is the whole coalition of players working in this sector to really try to move the needle. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps for the organization, you've heard the evolution of Pitt being kind of the incubator site for ISWP with the seed funding that we received from USAID. But then we had a consultant do a feasibility study with us a few years ago where they interviewed sector stakeholders, you know, across industries, nonprofits, academia. And the consultant's recommendation was that, yes, there is a space for ISWP to be a standalone thing that is unique to what else is happening out there worldwide, and has some unique value propositions to it. And that they did think that the opportunity for sustainability and revenue models was there for it to be a standalone organization. So we are currently moving towards hiring an executive director. The image that you see here is the founding board with 11 different leaders representing cross-section of the wheelchair sector. So we have representatives from the International Society of Prosthetics and Orthotics, from the World Federation of Occupational Therapy, from Latter-day Saints Charities, from Permobile industry partner, from Mobility India, an NGO in India that does both service and training, from ATA, the Argentine assistive technology organization, from Shonaquip in South Africa, Alba Polanco from the Dominican Republic, who you may have heard from earlier today. She was a former member of the National Disability Council in Dominican Republic, as well as Edward Winter from World Vision, and Paula Rushton from academia, Claude Tardif from ISPO. So this has been so foundational, I think, to our future life here as ISWP in trying to identify what is the membership model, what are the different revenue models that will help us be successful now and into the future. And the link is there also to find out a little bit more about the founding board. So that concludes our formal presentation, but one of the learning objectives for our session was to try to contrast what ISWP is offering, or what we will offer in the future, with other AT related professional associations in which you are affiliated. So we'd like to know, what is it that you like about the AT related associations that you belong to, and perhaps who are they? And you can feel free to drop that information into the chat or just voice aloud. And thank you, Nancy, for dropping in all these links. And I see that Marie also suggested that it's better to translate all the packages in Arabic and not only the test. Thank you. Yeah, we know that the translation of the training materials is another key step. So we'll give you a couple minutes to think and then open it up for discussion. Lauren from CVent will also now give you the opportunity to unmute, so please feel free to also voice aloud. Teresa suggests in the chat that she appreciates the common values we share in the AT groups. It tends to empower others to be together with like-minded people. Totally agree. I know Teresa is an active member in AOTA, right? In Clinicians Task Force, in RESNA. And ISWP. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this. This was amazing. How could like I and other people get involved in stuff like this and help with ISWP mission?
Thanks, Maddie. You are welcome. If you have not already, please join our distribution list from one of the links that Nancy listed above, and maybe we could paste that into the chat again. We have a fairly regular newsletter that goes out with different opportunities, but you can also just use the contact us feature in the website to let us know what your interests are specifically. You know, which of those P's do you most align with, or where would you like to get more experience? Perhaps what countries you would like to work in, what languages you speak, and we could further direct you from there. Robert McDonough, hello, Robert McDonough says brainstorming and utilization of networking for problem solving. That's awesome. What organizations do you belong to, Robert? He's an ATP, so RESNA, awesome.
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
So I belong to RESNA, AOTA, ISWP, but one thing that I really like that I was watching Sarah's lecture yesterday, and like the sharing the network, sharing the resources. So, you know, like when Sarah delineate of the whole process that Colombia has been going through and the training, because I think, you know, all the countries are different and culturally different, but there are very similar needs, like you guys said, you know, talked about training, improving service delivery. So the sharing the model, the open, to having this website and having this open source, I think this is very wonderful and super helpful. So my involvement with Brazil in the implementation of outcomes, you know, yes, I think outcomes are essential and we need to push that, but we need to capacitate professionals, and you know, so it's like it's a joint force, a joint effort, but you can't collect good outcomes if you don't have people knowing what they are doing. So somehow we could do something with like outcomes and, you know, and all this training, the training courses and everything.
muted. So thanks, Anna. So if you had to envision a service or a forum or a group or some other offering, what would it look like so that we can stay better up to date on all the things that are happening globally? And this could be for anyone.
Yeah, we talked about this like a couple of times, and like we have similar, we have groups that have the similar intent, like RESNA International, the International SIG RESNA, the ISWP, the like many other groups that we kind of have the same mission, and the mission is always provide resources to other countries. But for example, like as simple as could be, I was just thinking this yesterday after like brainstorming and having the Latin America meet and greeting. Like, okay, it would be simple as if we would come to an ISS workshop conference, and the fact that the whole conference is in English and everything is in English, would we have a button to say, okay, translate this to, like would be English and Spanish? So people from Latin America, even though Brazil doesn't speak Spanish, it speaks Portuguese, but the majority speaks Spanish, and Brazilians feel more comfortable in Spanish than Portuguese. Things like that. And in terms of like the outcomes, I don't know, like if we have an idea, like I think this group could brainstorm about how in this process of delineating these 8 phases of service delivery provision, like we have to measure this in these steps. We need to measure this, and we need to measure if we are doing these 8 steps consistently, if they are meeting the patient's needs. And there was actually a discussion that we had in our group, like, is there any way that these 8 steps there are instruments that have been validated and translated into so many languages. Can we provide a link? So like if you want to see if your patient has skills in pushing wheelchairs or using power wheelchairs, then you have a link wheelchair skills training, and they have all different languages of the wheelchair skills trainings. If there is for outcome in related to satisfaction, that we would have the FMA in their language that the FMA has been translated and validated. So like things like that. That's how I envision, but I'm not sure how this could be all done.
Thanks, Anna. One thing we didn't cover was the work of our evidence-based practice working group, and I think maybe you have been involved in that also, but we do have a repository of resources there and recent literature, and did develop a minimum uniform data set, but I like the idea of ensuring that we have the translated versions or links to where to request access of those, for example, as being an added offering. Thank you for that. I think we could go to the next slide, John, which is simply, and we've already kind of covered that, but what else you would like to see from ISWP specifically. So I see a lot of you out there that this organization may be new, or you've been recently introduced to us, and would love to hear from you about what else you would like to see. Nancy also included the ISWP data repository, thank you, that's hosted through ADEP. So
Mary?
Yes.
Hi, it's Rob.
Hi, Rob.
How are you? I think that what's difficult with all the organizations and all the like say RESNA with the ATP, you have all the clinical professionals involved, you have your PTs, you have your OTs, you have, your assistants, and just the whole gamut of everything that's involved in healthcare. What gets difficult when you belong or you're members with a number of these organizations or establishments or brainstorming is a lot of them don't work together in your continuing education requirements, in your courses and renewals, and they all want to well, they all want to say that they're on board and that they're, they're working towards the common goal. But when you need 30 credits for this and 24 credits for that and 30 credits for this, and they don't, I'm not saying that all the credits got to be for a PT license and ATP, but it gets difficult, and not only difficult but expensive every couple of years when you're trying to maintain these credentials and establishments, and for your benefit, the benefit of your employer, the individuals, veterans, patients that you're working with. It's so tough to break that up when they're together, but they're not together.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I think that's also a delicate balance to strike, because each organization, of course, like you say, has its own continuing education requirements with good reason, but that could be a barrier to entry for why you wouldn't pursue an additional certification or why you wouldn't specialize. There's, of course, a cost involved. There are time constraints, of course, that we all have. So yeah, I think that it's a really good point. Make sure that all the organizations are talking. If you're not familiar already, there's an organization called GATO, which serves in that purpose globally to try to connect all the different organizations that are working within AT together, and they hold global consultations as well. The WHO Gate also, that's another distribution list that you might want to join if you haven't done that already. They do a nice job of distributing information about ISWP and other organizations as well. But Rob, those are good points. Thank you.
Hi, Maggie. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Hi, Marie. How are you?
Fine, and you? Thank you. So, for me, ISWP is a very important resource for our region, because we have many problems here, and we have many, how do we say, challenges and many things to develop. So we need maybe more support. I have to think about in what, yani. But thank you for everything, but because it's really important what ISWP make for me and for my country till now.
Thank you, Marie. Marie is joining us from Lebanon and has been a wonderful training and service partner there.
Well, thanks, everybody. I think we should close this out. I know there's a CEU number we need to share. Nancy, is that?
Yes. So the CEU code, let me make sure I have it up and correct.
Looks like Becca actually just shared it for you.
Perfect.
So I think we're good.
Also, it's 89590U, and that is a 0, not an O. So 89590U, and it's in the chat as well.
Thank you for joining, everyone. I'll drop our
Yes, hello.
I'll drop our contact information into the chat. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.